The Wise Heart is a production of Duke & Associates. livingstories.tv.
In modern life, we have become marvelous at managing and engineering and exploiting things, but we're not very good at knowing what to invest ourselves in beyond our own careers or our own selves. The longing of the younger generation is, what's going on here that's not quantified? What do I do that brings a greater sense of purpose? It's not a question of what are the answers. It's a question of, are the questions pondered?
We have a vision for the university's community to be inquiry-driven, ethically engaged, and diverse. Those are words right out of the vision statement for the university. What it means to be not just a great university, but also a good university, an institution committed to education of the heart and the mind.
Before I started at Emory, I was an HIV and AIDS advisor in the country of Lesotho in Southern Africa. And working there, working with local government systems around issues of HIV in a country with a 23% adult prevalence rate, I understood that I had some skills that I wanted to deepen and to develop, which is why I came back for a master's in public health. Emory, and particularly the Rollins School of Public Health, is really focused on application of learning. Good research, great minds, but specifically, how can we apply this to make a difference in the field and in the world? I'm coming out of here trained in biostatistics, trained in epidemiology, and other sorts of ways of thinking about looking at and understanding problems, which I didn't have before. I think America is very insular. I think that that's a challenge. And at the same time, I think that people are loving and good-willed and extremely caring. I have great hope. I have great hope that we can shift things. I'm in a school full of people who believe and who are hopeful. And I am fortunate to have colleagues like that all over the world who speak lots of different languages and look lots of different ways, and you just go back to them and try to find some hope.
Many people don't know that the Emory School of Medicine actually traces its genealogy to Atlanta's first medical college, which was founded in 1854 and held its classes in the old city hall that was built that same year. Later, the Atlanta Medical College moved to its own building on Butler Street, and when Atlanta founded Grady Memorial Hospital in 1892 to care for the city's indigent population, the hospital was located next to the medical school, so that healthcare and health education could go hand in hand. That tradition has continued. Emory has a contract with Grady Hospital to provide something like 80% of the medical services there through our physician faculty members and medical residents. The balance of that healthcare comes through the Morehouse School of Medicine.
I think of education as being the development of a community of scholars and learning, of research, of achievement, truth, but also service to the larger community.
Every single day, hundreds of people are wrestling with physical conditions, diseases, infirmities, and they're trying to find out who at Emory they can trust to take their problem to.
Emory Healthcare is the largest healthcare system in Georgia and has been for some time. What's really important to understand, though, is it's not only a healthcare system, but part of our academic health system. And so one facet of its size in Georgia is that Emory School of Medicine has educated something like a quarter of the physicians practicing in the state of Georgia.
A very large part of the School of Medicine and Emory Healthcare sit right here on the campus with nursing, public health, the college, the law school, the business school. I mean, we're literally steps away from each other. And that provides the opportunity for the kinds of collaboration that simply don't take place at most medical schools or most universities elsewhere.
If we're an academic medical center, we have to be on the penetrating point of the cutting edge, not on the cutting edge. And that means that we have to actually be making the discoveries ourselves that make a difference in health and healing.
Emory, in any given year, does about $500 million worth of sponsored research. Emory and Georgia Tech are doing collaborative projects on things like biomedical engineering.
People coming up with very interesting ideas and cross-fertilizing each other, and then going out and being able to recruit others in with expertise who could answer these really interesting questions. Dr. DeLong is one of the great gurus of Parkinson's disease, and he created or adapted something called deep brain stimulation, where at least in many individuals, the symptoms of Parkinson's disease would disappear. Dr. Don Stein has for a number of years been trying to figure out how we can ameliorate brain injury with drug therapy. Linda Sandalis is an outstanding surgeon. She performed the first hand transplant surgery in the Southeast last year. She's one of the few people in the United States that is fully trained in both transplant surgery and in plastic and microvascular surgery.
The CDC, right next to Emory, CARE, the American Cancer Society, the Carter Center, the Arthritis Foundation, make us a true public health capital for the entire world.
Emory touches this community, it touches the world community, and it touches it in ways that nobody else touches it.
You're in a day and age where you're highly wired into the internet, you're into Facebook, MySpace, Twitter, you're constantly giving out little bits of yourself. You need to learn how to still talk to people. You need to know how to write. That's really what literature is about. It's a learning process in itself. Every time you read something, every time you write a paper down, it's a matter of organization. It brings structure to sometimes the chaos that can be depicted in something that you're reading. In some ways, it's the highest level of cognitive ability somebody could aspire to.
I think of poetry as the best repository for our most humane and empathetic thinking and feeling. Poetry is the one way we have of connecting not only to the intellect, but also to the heart. I still think of the lines from William Carlos Williams' poem, "You can't get the news from poetry, but men die miserably every day for lack of what is found there." Poetry asks of us that we be more observant, that we be more thoughtful and empathetic. It shows us why we are alike, not that we are different. After 9/11, I think more poetry got written in this country than had been written in years.
As the former dean of Harvard College puts it, we've chosen excellence, but we've lost soul. As the former dean of Yale Law School says, universities have given up on the meaning of life. Adam Smith talked about the importance of a context of moral framework and social life and community, which held together and held in check unrestrained self-aggrandizement or self-interest. And we've sort of taken even that away so that businesses don't know how to nurture.
The BBA level, our students in the first 2 years are required to be immersed in a liberal arts education. So they have to take a range of courses that is not just learning the principles of business, but they're asking questions about philosophy, literature, and history, and so that they can put what they actually learn later in their junior and senior years into context. And so it is the connection between the liberal arts and the importance of liberal arts and business that frames what it means to be a principled business leader.
We're really talking about the university as a place for leadership, a place of character, the sort of thing that we seem to have almost so little of today in public life. That's why I was so eager to bring, after we got the Woodruff gift and had some running room, some resources, to get people like Dick Ellman and Hal Berman. Their scholarship was impeccable. But this magnetic quality was that they loved their subject and they were able to excite that kind of enthusiasm and love in others. And out of that, something more occurs.
They wanted to build the library, and so did Laney. Laney sent Elman to purchase at auction Lady Gregory's personal collection of W.B. Yeats, the Cool Park collection. And this became the cornerstone of what became our special collections, now known as Marble. And that was the beginning of the great archival collection in Irish and English literature that Emory is now known for. Other stories all around the university can be told about the meteoric growth of intellectual life here, of major professorships to the university that we have now.
We're a very impatient culture. If you give a different story, if you encourage people to seek out a different perspective, it gets them more in touch with their human side. We're encouraging people, we're cultivating new ideas and even new forms of art in our own way.
Always there is something more to know. What lingers at the edge of thought, awaiting illumination. It is a bolt of lightning. Where it strikes, I read the line over and over, as if I might discern the little fires set, the flames of an idea licking the page, how knowledge burns. Beyond the exclamation point, its thin agreement, angle of surprise, there are questions, the word why. Even as they rise up to meet us, the white page hovers beneath, silent, incendiary, waiting.
Goes back to 1888 when there was a baseball game played between Emory and the University of Georgia. And stories from that game of gambling and drinking and crazy college behavior got back to the president and the board of trustees. They weren't happy about what they had heard had gone on at that game. And there was an edict that was issued that Emory will never have intercollegiate athletics. And when Emory moved from Oxford, Georgia to the Atlanta campus, they reissued that edict. Said, we will never have intercollegiate athletics. We sponsored an athletic program, but it was largely intramurals, and they were always ones that carried lifelong benefits. There were a group of students who were really interested in getting an intercollegiate tennis team going, and this was in the early 1900s. And they kept petitioning and asking and begging, and the answer was always no. We're not going to start a tennis team. So what they did, they got together with the track and field team, and within a track and field meet, they worked in a tennis match as a scoring event in the track and field meet. And that was the start of tennis at Emory, and it's had wonderful history since then. It wasn't until it was 1985 when we found a group of schools that we felt comfortable competing with athletically because they shared a similar philosophy with athletics and academics, that we started our athletic program. And it's an affiliation that's formed strictly on academic and athletic philosophy.
Debate at Emory has a very rich tradition that goes back to the 1800s in the Oxford campus. It was a modified Socratic method way of challenging students to intellectual rigor, a lot of which is forming the right questions, not always seeking the right answers. That evolved to modern tournament debating in the early part of the 1900s. The intercollegiate debaters would get on trains and go to 5 or 6 colleges and have jousts against the debate team at those colleges. Starting in 1948, intercollegiate debate nationally became more tournament-focused. Emory was poised to capitalize on that because it had such a rich tradition of discussion and debate. In 1950, the Intercollegiate Debate Forum decided that they wanted to name the organization in honor of Alben Barkley, who had been Vice President of the United States, but who also had been an Emory debater in the early part of the 1900s. So they wrote to Vice President Barkley asking if they could use his name. He was flattered and honored to have his name attached to intercollegiate debate at Emory. We're called the Barkley Forum. We've taken more women to the national debate tournament than all the other schools in the United States combined. And one of the great highlights of my coaching career was 2007. We had the first all-woman team win the national debate tournament in its then 61-year history. And I love that.
9 days ago, Clinton was in Tunisia, and she pledged that we would give a massive amount of democracy assistance and economic support. What piece of evidence do you think you have in your 1AC that speaks to the question of that not being sufficient to resolve your internal link evidence, which just says we need to rhetorically support the Tunisian people via material assistance?
First of all, our evidence, our Catellus evidence, indicates that coordination between the United States government and the European government is essential to make sure that that aid is given.
But what piece of evidence says that that's not occurring now?
Second is our innocent evidence, which indicates that just speaking about things, particularly economic aid, is not good enough to actually enhance the United States' credibility.
We have to rethink critical thinking. How do we sort through all that information? How do we decide what is legitimate information and what is opinion, proselytizing? I think the skills of debating are terribly important. And one of the ways that we play this out is in the classroom. We've reached a lot of kids in after-school programs. Using it as an instructional method in the classroom is something that we're working right now with the Atlanta Public Schools on. We're doing a pilot project in all the social studies middle school classes as a way to engage the students. When we teach to the test, we don't encourage the critical thinking of the student, ownership of their own learning. And when we use it in the classroom, we get a lot of animated discussion and engagement. If I ask a student to read a book, they might or might not read the book. If I tell them they're going to debate against another student on that book, they'll probably read 4 or 5 books, because they're motivated by their peers.
In 1836, the Methodists of Georgia decided to create a new college. They bought 1,400 acres near what's now Covington, Georgia, about 40 miles east of present-day Atlanta. Atlanta itself had not yet been born. 15 students showed up. There were 4 professors, a pretty good student-to-faculty ratio. 5 more students would come along by the end of that term. Their curriculum was a pretty standard classical liberal arts curriculum of the day. Greek and Latin, natural sciences, mathematics, moral philosophy, and more Bible than they would have had to study at Franklin College, for instance, which later became the University of Georgia. John Wesley, the founder of the Methodist movement, was very keen on education. He founded schools, he launched publishing houses, and it was very important to him that education be part of the transformation of society.
2 of the issues on which Wesley found himself very much at odds with his church were over the issue of slavery and over the issue of women and women's role in society. The early years of Emory's history are deeply caught up in slavery and the issues that the church itself had with slavery and the extent to which Emory relied on slaves that had been borrowed, rented from neighboring landowners to clear the fields and build the buildings.
Emory, like every college or university founded south of the Mason-Dixon line before the Civil War, was based on a slave economy, and it was founded by trustees and faculty members, many of whom themselves owned slaves. The Civil War did bring the end of that economy, It also brought a temporary end to Emory College because the college was closed in 1861 until the end of hostilities.
We of the South should thank God that we are in all respects so well off so soon after so great a war. I, for one, thank God that there is no longer slavery in these United States. I have got new light. I do now believe many things that I did not believe 20 years ago. I hope to have on many difficult problems more new light.
The end of the Civil War was really only the beginning of a long struggle towards civil rights in the United States. And around the turn of the 20th century, that struggle was manifested in the experience of an Emory professor. He taught Latin. His name was Andrew Sled. He looked around and saw the many incidents of lynching throughout the United States, but particularly in his native South, and was outraged by what he saw. He expressed this outrage in an article published in the Atlantic Monthly in 1902. And the publication of that article ignited a fury in the populace of Georgia.
The population was so caught up in the racial issues of that period that the pressure to fire Professor Sled became so intense that in fact he was fired.
That was not a unique case in American higher education in the first decade of the 20th century, interestingly. You have to remember that this was before a time when academic freedom was codified. It wasn't until the creation of the American Association of University Professors around 1915 that academic freedom, as we've come to understand it, became protected by university codes. Change did come, but it came slowly. It would be another 50 years before the United States Supreme Court handed down its decision in Brown versus Board of Education.
That was a very turbulent period, 1960s, because we were reacting as a community to the federal court decisions eliminating segregation. The response to those legal cases was something known in the South as massive resistance. It was like fighting the Civil War all over again. No federal government's going to tell us what we've got to do.
Georgia had a law on its books that said you may, as a private institution, certainly you may integrate, but if you do, you will lose your nonprofit status. And Emory's board chair and chair of the law school challenged that in the Georgia Supreme Court and succeeded. So Emory has positive stories related to race and some horribly negative stories.
The first two students entered the nursing school, the first black students. Soon thereafter, a group of black students entered the undergraduate college. What does it mean to welcome a new group of people into an institution? Does the institution just continue as it is, or does it really embrace that change and embrace the opportunity that presents itself with diversity? That really began Emory's investment in Black studies as a field of inquiry.
In this 175th year of Emory's existence, we can be grateful that some wise hearts have sought knowledge and that our own small measure of wisdom continues to enlarge our understanding. Transformations that have taught us a fuller truth about community, about human dignity, about civil rights. Emory acknowledges its entwinement with the institution of slavery throughout the college's early history. Emory regrets both this undeniable wrong and the university's decades of delay in acknowledging slavery's harmful legacy.
The story is told that when the founders of Emory College were casting about for an appropriate name for their new educational enterprise, one of the names they considered was that of the first Methodist bishop, Thomas Cook. His name is spelled in a way that we would pronounce Coke, C-O-K-E. So Emory came within a hair's breadth of being Coke University. The 20th century for Emory is a fascinating arc bookended by two great philanthropists who had their own unique relationships with Emory, but also had their own unique relationships with the Coca-Cola Company. The first of these was Asa Candler, who was the founder of the Coca-Cola Company and the brother of Warren Candler. Warren was an 1875 graduate of Emory College and later served as president of the college and became a bishop of the church. Warren Candler was a striving, ambitious churchman who, after he graduated from college, entered the Methodist ministry and went on to become an editor for the Methodist Publishing House in Nashville, Tennessee. He was in that position in Nashville in 1888 when he received a letter from Asa Candler. Dear Warren, I write to you about a couple of things. First is that President Hopkins of Emory College has left for bigger salary. And many of my friends are saying Warren would be a good president of Emory. I say to them what I say to you. Warren has a good position in Nashville. He has a home. He makes more money than he could make as a college president. He should not take that job as president of Emory College. By the way, you know how I suffer from headaches. Well, the other day a friend of mine told me about this drink, and I tried some. It's called Coca-Cola, and it relieved my headaches. And I tried some a couple of days later, and again it relieved my headaches, so I decided to put some money into it. Well, the money he put into it, of course, was the decision to buy the secret formula in 1888. And also in 1888, Brother Warren ignored his older brother's advice and became president of Emory College.
In the 19-teens, the Methodist Church chartered Southern Methodist University, SMU. And to the east, there was a little bit of a debate whether or not the best location for the next Methodist campus would be in Atlanta or Birmingham, Alabama. And at the time, there was much to commend both cities. There is a letter that was sent by Asa Candler to the Methodist Church saying, you know, he would like strongly to recommend that new university come to Atlanta. He said, in fact, to help assist in that process, I will donate 75 acres of land. That's the initial 75 of something in excess of 650 acres that we have here right now. He says, I will also donate $1 million. This is 1915. That's a lot of money.
It wasn't until 1919 that Emory College moved here, and that was what led to the beginning of a lot of thought over more than half a century about how the liberal arts and sciences could expand and have influence on the professional schools that were already here. Asa Candler, by the time he died in 1929, not only had served as chairman of the board of trustees of Emory for some 25 or 30 years, but also had poured about $8 million into this new university, which in today's money would be over $40, $50 million, and acres of land. By that time, the Coca-Cola Company had been acquired by a group led by a man named Ernest Woodruff. He had a son named Robert. Robert went off to Little Emory College in Oxford, Georgia in the fall of 1908. And by the end of that first term, it was pretty clear to everybody, probably including Robert, that first of all, he was miserable being in college. Secondly, he had some academic problems, and in retrospect, some people think he may have had dyslexia. And third, he just really wanted to get on with the business of making money. And so the president of Emory College wrote to wealthy Ernest Woodruff in Atlanta suggesting that it might be good for all concerned if Robert did not come back in the spring semester. So Robert Woodruff went off to become a laborer in a foundry, and soon enough was actually working as vice president for the White Motor Company in Cleveland, Ohio. In the meantime, in the 1920s, Robert's father, Ernest, put together this group of people who bought the Coca-Cola Company from the Candlers. Ernest soon enticed his son Robert to come back and to become president of the Coca-Cola Company. Robert had a gift, a natural talent for marketing, and soon made Coca-Cola a world-renowned brand. Despite having been essentially flunked out of Emory College, Robert Woodruff understood the value of a university and understood the importance of a medical institution for the city, for the state, for the region. He gave $50,000 in 1937 to establish a cancer institute named for his maternal grandfather, Robert Winship. In time, he gave something like $230 million just to the health sciences at Emory, helping to bring the Centers for Disease Control to a neighboring plot of land through some advice to his friend, Dwight Eisenhower.
There was no doubt that Mr. Woodruff was a man of great vision of what was going to come into the future. Emory University just has been absolutely magnificent, what he's done there. I think this was part of the inner drive that the man had.
Robert and George Woodruff were the sons of Emily and Ernest Woodruff. Ernest and Emily Woodruff's estate was established as a fund, basically a kind of foundation. It was actually George Woodruff, I think, as the story goes, who said to his brother one day, "We need to make certain that the Emily and Ernest Woodruff Fund is in the hands of good stewards when we're not around. And I think we should give this over to Emory University." And Robert agreed. And that set the machinery in motion, basically, to transfer the entire corpus of the Woodruff Fund to the university in 1979.
The corpus was 3 million shares of Coca-Cola stock, which was worth $105 million at the time. And that was the largest gift in philanthropic history in America, not just to a university, but to anything. Those 3 million shares of Coca-Cola stock today, given the stock splits and all, it would be worth $2.25 billion.
That was a historical moment at Emory. I remember Laney coming down off of the podium in Glenn Memorial and embracing Robert Woodruff in front of all of this audience. It was a very moving moment. What began to happen in 1979, I think, is unheralded in the history of higher education in America, the transformation that's taken place at Emory from being the university that it was prior to 1979 and what it is today.
You might call it the Coca-Cola legacy. It goes back to Asa Candler, comes up through Robert Woodruff, and continues on through Roberto Goizueta, who was chairman and CEO of the company and simultaneously a trustee of Emory from 1980 till his death in 1997. Many families and individuals have been great benefactors to Emory and have helped in this transformation of a tiny college in a small town into a great university in a major American city.
In June of 1981, some very unusual cases of a fatal pneumonia came across my desk. I was chief of research in sexually transmitted diseases at the CDC. One of our areas of focus was a hepatitis B infection and the testing of a hepatitis B vaccine, including the testing in gay men. We began really with trying to identify what the problem was, to come up with a case definition, which soon expanded from the fatal pneumonia and other fatal infections to some very rare cancers that were linked by a suppression of the immune system. We now know that when those first 5 cases were reported in gay men in 1981, there were already 250,000 gay men in the US who had been infected with a virus which would ultimately kill them before therapy became available. People went from complacency and denial of the problem to fear and panic about the scope of it. Could you get it from sitting on a toilet seat? Could you get it from eating dinner with people who had it? Was it safe to care for people who had? As a neighbor to Emory all these years, I knew of much work that had gone on not only in other areas of public health, but also in AIDS. Leaders in the world were Doctors Dennis Leota and Ray Shinazi, who developed two of the first and most used antiretroviral drugs against HIV. This was going on during that period of time when the disease was uniformly fatal. And their drugs, 3TC and FTC, the latter named Emtreva after Emory, were developed here on our campus at Emory and have gone on to save literally millions of lives throughout the world. Our Center for AIDS Research was first funded by the National Institutes of Health in 1997. Its major focus is prevention of HIV.
Emory is very proud to be the home of a drug which is prescribed for 95% of all Americans who receive prescription therapy for HIV infection. The university ultimately received $540 million, much of which has been reinvested in pursuing a strategy to recruit distinctive faculty, to invest in laboratory facilities, and to invest in some of our existing faculty here to do more and better science.
There are a couple of interesting things about the Andrew Sled affair and the way in which, in 1902, public pressure brought to bear on the Board of Trustees of Emory led to their insisting on his resignation, basically firing him. Fast forward to the mid-1960s, when Thomas Altizer was writing a kind of radical theology. He was one of a half dozen or so theologians who had developed a kind of radical thinking about the way in which God's activity in the world was really a removal of God's self from the world. They played that out in a particular way that often was simplified and misunderstood, but it really came to a head in 1966, the week leading up to Easter, when Time magazine published a cover story asking the question in big, bold red letters on a black background, "Is God dead?" And one of the theologians featured in that cover story was Thomas J.J. Altizer of Emory University. This led to a firestorm of controversy, some of it, a lot of it negative, but not all of it. Of course, there were also those elements of the church that found this offensive, and particularly offensive that a Methodist university would condone such outrageous thinking or publication. And to the credit of the president of the university at the time, Sanford Atwood, and the chairman of the board at the time, Henry Bowden, who was himself a devout Methodist, but also a devoted university person, there was never any question about firing this tenured faculty member in the Department of Religion. It simply was not going to happen. So it's interesting to ask what changed during those 60 years, basically, between Andrew Sled and Thomas Altizer. One of the things that had changed was a kind of understanding within the broad national academic community that the publication and the voicing of intellectually arrived at and soundly argued positions should be defended.
This goes beyond freedom of speech. This is academic freedom. Academic freedom is more about a guarantee that I will be heard. This means that the listener has the obligation to imagine that there might be value in what I have to say. The role of the university is to invite deep examination of all of these subjects in order that truth ultimately can be pursued. But we need not insist on the resolution of these conversations. In fact, it's important not to insist at times on the resolution of these difficult conversations. The God is Dead episode turned out to be a wonderful illustration of a university at that time taking very seriously its responsibility to be a forum to engage difficult dialogue.
The Holocaust has the dubious distinction of being the best documented genocide in the world. You have first-hand witnesses, you have survivors, you have governments, you have the perpetrators. For the Holocaust not to have happened, who has to be wrong? The victims? The GIs who went in, or the Soviet soldiers who went in and saw it? The bystanders who said, we watched the trains go into the camp day after day and come out empty? Holocaust denial is not a rational thing. It is a form of anti-Semitism. If you think about the etymology of the word prejudice, prejudge. Don't confuse me with the facts. I've made up my mind. Whether it's racism, whether it's anti-Semitism, whether it's sexism, it's not based on information. I published a book in 1993, right around the time I came to Emory, on the history of Holocaust denial in the United States, in England, parts of Europe, etc. And in the book, I briefly mentioned the name David Irving and devoted a page or two to him at most. And he was, at that point, the world's, and may still be, the world's most prominent Holocaust denier. He sued me for libel in the United Kingdom, which he could do because my book had been published there. And I think he thought I would just run the other way. I wouldn't fight it. I would pay him £500 to settle and be done with it. Someone who suggested I settle with him, I said to them, well, what would you like me to settle for? 1 million Jewish victims, 2 million Jewish victims, gas chamber. I mean, you can't, with certain people you cannot settle. And initially the lawyer worked pro bono, but then couldn't do that at certain points. So a defense fund had to be raised, etc. The trustees said to me, we at Emory expect a number of things from our faculty. We expect them to be first-rate teachers. We expect them to be first-rate researchers. And we expect them to be morally engaged. And we can think of nobody who fits that profile better than you do, particularly in terms of this lawsuit. We want to support you. It'll be as if you're teaching us, except for this particular semester, when you're in London, the courtroom will be your classroom, and we will learn from you from afar. And that's what happened.
For Emory, it was an active defense of academic freedom. In the Altizer case, it was something of a passive defense of academic freedom. When people were clamoring for Altizer's firing, the university said, he's our faculty member, he stays. In Deborah Lipstadt's case, people were at her throat and the university had to step forward. When the court found in favor of Deborah Lipstadt and concluded that, in fact, she was right in calling David Irving a denier of the Holocaust, an anti-Semite, a fraudulent historian, it was a ratification not only of her scholarship, but I think in some ways of the university's decision actively to defend her scholarship.
About 15 years ago, Professor Angelika Baumer and I decided to co-teach a course of memoirs of the Holocaust. She's a comparative literature specialist. I'm a historian. She is born to German parents. Her father was in the Wehrmacht. They were in Germany during the entire Nazi period. There was a certain buzz about it because everybody thought, oh, the Jew and the German are co-teaching a class. There were difficult moments. We're talking about her parents' generation. We're talking about where she comes from. It started out taking courageous inquiry, and as a result, both of us have grown tremendously.
It's unusual for a university like Emory University to have such a deep commitment to religion and public life or to a theology school. Emory University is a member of the AAU, And those are genuinely the elite universities of the country and thereby the world, and they put a huge emphasis on the research skills of their faculty. You can go through the list of members of the AAU and find no other school comparable to Emory that cares about the role of religion in public life. There are more than 300 faculty on Emory's campus who have religion as a research interest. That's just an extraordinary thing for Research One University that cares passionately about how religions cooperate rather than how religions collide. I think our current circumstances in public discourse in the United States are a threat not just to democracy but also education in its classic form of deep learning, deep understanding, and deep listening even to those things that you know you will probably for a lifetime disagree about. I like to think of those situations as opportunities for conflict transformation.
The move to embrace the other who is different is always a difficult move. We served in Korea many years ago and as missionaries, and I know how difficult that is. The students that come here are thrown in with people that they've never known before. This is a challenge to their capacity to grow and to retain their own identity and authenticity. I think Emory is doing that very well indeed, and I'm proud of it.
Every year at commencement, Emory bestows degrees on men and women from 80 or 90 countries around the world. But actually, the international reach of Emory goes back about 120 years.
Emory is a locale where students from all religious traditions come together to have crucial dialogue across deeply held differences in religion: Jews, Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, Baha'is, and there are not many places on the face of the earth where all those folks come together.
The transformations that Emory has been through have taught us all a deeper and more complete truth about human dignity, civil rights, and finally, community.
You will see if you go to commencement that there is a prayer from a variety of different religious traditions. In Cannon Chapel, a multi-religious space, they realized that Muslims before their prayer here were washing their feet in the bathroom sinks. So they created a foot bath in an old kitchenette in the basement. They redid the entire thing so that people who came there to prayer would be able to have a comfortable, attractive, and convenient place to wash.
Students at Candler practice the sacred art of listening, very, very deep listening to each other. That is one of the best ways to form excellent leaders, especially in today's circumstances, where people are rewarded for not listening to each other and not learning how to compromise and how to promote community in the midst of deep differences. At the heart, that's what a liberal arts education ought to be doing for you.
How do we get people to talk to each other across these different perceptions and come to, if not on the same page, at least in the same library? It's a very vulnerable place. Sometimes you're talking about things that your parents told you should never talk about, or it's not polite. How can we create a place where you can have those uncomfortable feelings in a safe area? Martin Luther King says the arc of the universe tilts towards justice. And so I hope that we've given people some sense that there are paths that people have taken, there are tools to make things better, that there are ways that we can work for social justice, and that we're part of a history that has done that.
One monk, he spent 18 years in Chinese Gulag. In early 80, he came out. Then he mentioned during 18 years, there's a few occasions he really faced some danger. And I thought maybe danger on his life. And what kind of danger? I asked him. He mentioned danger of losing compassion towards Chinese. I believe the compassion brings inner strength that provides the proper utilization of our intelligence.
In Bangladesh, there was something which one can only call genocide. The Pakistan government then, and right up to the present day, has denied that those atrocities took place. It simply says they didn't happen. I found, when I was writing about this, a very strange thing, that here I am writing a novel which is an object that purports to be made up and fictional, and what I'm doing is actually saying something that really happened, whereas the people who claim to be representing what actually did happen are in fact being fictitious.
Try to work to find solutions. There are solutions to everything. Look at South Africa. You remember how we used to feel that it was impossible? You remember that? We thought it would never change. Look at this country. Look at the South. We thought it would never change.
I know I speak on behalf of millions. On this one occasion when I say thank you to all of you for your caring, for your support, for your commitment to our struggle for justice and peace. And I would want to pay a particularly warm tribute to young people, because I have been quite amazed at how young people have helped to change the moral climate in this land.
I taught a Sunday school class yesterday morning, told them that our speaker would be here today, and asked them, what is a symbol most vivid in your mind of his administration? And almost entirely this group, mostly visitors, said the tearing down of the Berlin Wall. And now I would like to introduce as our main speaker this morning at this commencement exercise, a man who, more than anyone in modern history, has had a beneficial impact on global society, the former president of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev.
Никогда еще направленность образования,
Never before has the thrust of education,
его этическая сторона,
its ethical aspect,
не имели такого значения,
been more significant
как сейчас,
than today,
перед лицом глобальных вызовов,
as we confront the global
с которыми
challenges
человечество сталкивается
humanity
на пороге
on the
нового
threshold
столетия.
of a new century.
Но откуда же явится глобальное
But how
сознание?
is the global awareness to emerge?
Откуда придет этика
Whence do
общего
we
блага?
arrive at an ethic of the common good?
Как и многие, я
Like many
связываю
others,
надежды с молодым
I put my
поколением
hope in the
образованных
educated
людей.
younger generation.
The whole notion of faith suggests that everything's not clear, that all the words haven't been written out. If every single question were answered by some sort of talismanic test, there wouldn't be any need for faith. To me, God wants you to take those walks through those issues, and if you've got an attitude of faith, you go where courageous inquiry leads you.
Universities have to have the creativity when challenging arguments and challenging discussions occur spontaneously, not to bury those, but rather to build on those and learn from them.
The university can be the spawning ground for the kind of leadership we need in this country. And I see that as being Emory's task and mission.
I have got new light. I do now believe many things that I did not believe 20 years ago. I hope to have on many difficult problems more new light.
as Emory University looks forward, it seeks the wisdom always to discern what is right and the courage to abide by its mission of using knowledge to serve humanity. May that always be so.
The Wise Heart is a production of Duke & Associates. livingstories.tv. For more information on The Wise Heart or to order DVDs, contact J. Duke at livingstories.tv.